Okay. Hi, and welcome again, everyone, to our listening session for the monitoring, observing, modeling, and predicting foundational activity of the Arctic Research Plan 2022 to 2026. Before we get started, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Hazel Shapiro. I'm a member of the IARPC Secretariat supporting both the observing and the modeling teams who are hosting this call. And I'm joining from the ancestral home of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute people in Boulder, Colorado. And I think we have a pretty small group today, so folks may know each other already. But if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and introduce yourself quickly in the chat. And we'll have a lot of time for sort of open discussion later in the meeting. So this meeting is being recorded, so it'll be posted on the IARPC website later this week and on YouTube. So if you have colleagues that weren't able to join us today, they can watch the recording and follow along that way. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with Zoom at this point, but if you are not, in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, there's an option to mute and unmute. This is going to be really a conversation and a dialogue. So we do welcome you to unmute and participate actively, but just when you're not speaking and when there are presenters talking, if you could keep yourselves muted, that would be quite helpful. And before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the circumpolar Arctic is the contemporary and ancestral home to many different Indigenous people. As those who are working in or residing in the Arctic, we recognize these lands and waters as the mostly unceded traditional homelands of Indigenous people. Wherever you may be viewing this webinar, IARPC honors. Oh, we're getting a little bit of feedback, so if everyone could be sure to mute. Thanks so much. Wherever you may be viewing this webinar, IARPC honors and recognizes the place-based knowledge system of Indigenous people and their ancestral and contemporary stewardship of their homelands. I welcome all of our webinar participants to do the same. It is the responsibility of each of us to learn, know, and gain a better understanding of the Indigenous peoples and cultures with which we engage. I also want to note that IARPC recently released a revised code of conduct, and if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, I would encourage you to do so. We really do want to do everything we can to create a safe, productive, inclusive, and welcoming meeting. So if at any time there's something that we can do to further those goals, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of the other IARPC staff or team leaders on the call. We encourage all meeting participants to enter with an open mind and to be respectful of the diverse perspectives and different knowledge systems represented on this call. And now I'll turn a bit more to the Arctic Research Plan and the topic of today's meetings. Before we get to the Arctic Research Plan, I guess I haven't had a chance to run through the chat introductions, but I'll go ahead and give a brief overview of IARPC. Anyway, it's a great reminder, even if you are already familiar. So IARPC is the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee of the National Science and Technology Council. This means that IARPC sits within the White House. We are tasked with enhancing research in the Arctic, both by bringing together federal agencies to better coordinate their work and by facilitating conversations among federal agencies, researchers, Arctic communities, and others who live and work in the Arctic. To do this, we bring together leaders from 16 agencies, departments, and offices across the US federal government. And we also run IARPC Collaborations, which is hosting the meeting that you are in right now. And it's a web platform that facilitates collaboration between federal agencies and non-federal folks with interests in the region. Every 5 years, we put together a new Arctic Research Plan in collaboration with federal agencies and the Arctic community. The Arctic is the most rapidly changing region on Earth. The new Arctic Research Plan provides a bold vision for federal agencies to nimbly and collaboratively help understand and support resilience in the face of these changes. The rate at which new Arctic challenges are emerging requires quick and decisive action. The Arctic Research Plan 2022 through 2026 aims to deliver science and knowledge to decision makers in the Arctic and beyond. The plan provides pathways to improve coordination among federal agencies working in the Arctic, as well as to strengthen important relationships between federal agencies and Indigenous communities academia, and non-federal researchers, the state of Alaska, nonprofits, and private sector and international organizations. The graphic here is on the cover of the report and reflects that more holistic approach. We want to give a big thanks to the artist, Molly Trainor from Nome, Alaska, for the detailed center illustration, and Eric Cline for the overall graphic design. So now I'll talk a little bit, just a quick introduction to the plan structure, and it may look familiar to you, though it has been updated a bit in the last few months. So this is the final structure of the plan. The top section shows the 4 policy drivers, that is areas where the Arctic research supports directly US policy. These connect to the other elements of the plan. In the middle and the center, you'll see 4 priority areas with icons indicating which policy drivers they support. The priority areas represent the areas of broad cross-cutting research focus, and each area has a goal that drives the plan. The priority areas are community resilience and health, Arctic system interactions, sustainable economies and livelihoods, and risk management and hazard mitigation. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the specific goals within each of those plans, but I do have that information available. So if there are questions about the goals or the directions that those priority areas are moving in, please don't hesitate to ask. And then below, where we'll be focusing on this meeting, are the foundational activities. These activities are essential to achieving the priority areas and will remain foundational to Arctic research beyond the duration of this 5-year plan. The foundational activities are data management, education, training, and capacity building, monitoring, observing, modeling, and predicting, participatory research and Indigenous leadership in research, and technology, innovation, and application. And so for today, we'll really be focusing in on that monitoring, observing, modeling, and predicting bucket, which Sally will be able to tell us more about. And finally, in the center of the graphic, you'll see the IARPC logo, the iceberg, and that represents our IARPC Collaborations platform, which we'll use to put the plan into action. And so, while planning this 5-year plan allows us to be relatively nimble, things are changing really quickly. So we decided to switch to a biennial implementation plan to allow us these 2-year cycles to be even more responsive to immediate needs within the Arctic. The planning structure will also provide more opportunities for Arctic researchers and residents to drive the work that we're doing. So the first biennial implementation plan will cover the period 2022 through 2024 and will be released in September of this year. Transition teams are currently working on the first part of the first plan and are asking for input from now until March. You'll see that on what should be included. And I will be taking notes today, so I'll be able to capture any suggestions or feedback that's provided in this meeting, but you can also send in your input through a Google form. And if you, and I would recommend that you do that as well for things that you share in this meeting, just so we make sure to capture it sort of exactly in the words and meaning that you are intending, but I will do my best to capture everything in this call. So this is a really exciting time to be involved with IARPC as we're making the shift towards implementing this first biennial implementation plan. We see this new approach as a big step forward in being more responsive to emerging research questions and to engage new people from across federal agencies, as well as outside of the federal sphere. So I'm going to hand this over to Sally now to talk a little bit more in detail about the MOMP foundational activity, and then we'll have a chance for questions and then move into comments. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Hazel. Okay, oops, now of course I can't see my, okay, so thank you all for joining us today. So as Hazel mentioned, this is a listening session where we're hoping to get input on the monitoring, observing, modeling, and prediction, or MOMP foundational activity. And since MOMP includes both modeling and observing, the modeling and observing collaboration teams are co-hosting this meeting. So I'm Sally McFarland from DOE. I'm a co-lead for the MOMP foundational activity drafting team. My other co-lead is Zuxing Davis from DOE, who's also on the call. And we also have members on our team from NOAA, NSF, and NASA as well. Then within the collaboration teams, we have the collaboration team leaders on the call as well. I'm a co-lead of the observing team. And my other co-leads are Sandy Starkweather, Will Ambrose, and Craig Chithlook, who are all on the call. And then from the modeling collaboration team, we have Rich Cullither, Renu Joseph, and Wilbert Wire. So I think we maybe have more leads than participants on the call today, but we're, I think it just sort of illustrates how interested we all are in hearing input on this plan. As Hazel mentioned, sort of the overall structure of the research plan, it has the priority research areas, and then it has the 5 foundational activities. So the foundational activities relate to, support, and inform the priority areas. They're critical to improving research and addressing each priority area, but they're also intended to be foundational, as in the name, and actually to continue on beyond the 5-year plan. So the idea is that the research priorities might change more rapidly, but the foundational activities are sort of fundamental to Arctic research. As we have been drafting our foundational activity, one of sort of the things we've been thinking about is that it will focus more on structural and coordinating activities to improve Arctic predictability through observations and modeling, rather than specific science goals, which will be more under the priority research areas. Additionally, the MOMP objectives will be cross-cutting, so sort of will encompass in some way or be beneficial to all the priority areas, but then the deliverables under those broader objectives might be in support of a specific priority area. So another question that has come up several times related to MOP is that it does bring together activities that are currently conducted by 2 different collaboration teams. And so what we envision is that the MOMP, in the implementation plan, MOMP will include activities, both activities that bring the modeling and observing communities together, as well as activities that are focused specifically on the modeling prediction or observing monitoring communities. And we also expect that the modeling and observing collaboration teams will remain as their separate independent teams during implementation of this next plan. However, to sort of encourage that engagement between observing and modeling, we expect that we will periodically hold joint collaboration team meetings on relevant topics, just as we have the past couple of years. We've had several joint meetings between our teams. So we definitely don't want to take away from each individual team, which has a strong record of bringing people together in their areas. We just want to build on that and help bring the 2 teams together a bit more. So these are our current draft objectives for MOMP, and under each objective, we have some draft deliverables, which I will just touch on, but I don't have as examples, but I don't have them laid out in the slides. So our first draft objective is to coordinate activities and communities of practice to better synthesize observations and modeling to advance Arctic research. So in part, I think this is what each of the observing and modeling teams are already doing. And then in part, this objective is also meant to bring those 2 activities together. So some draft deliverables that we envision or that are in discussion under this objective include things like developing synthesis data sets or best estimate data sets, along with relevant model simulations for some of the large interagency field campaigns, such as Mosaic, or some of the long-term observational activities, such as NG Arctic and above. So really kind of working with those teams that are already working on these large scale projects, just to help bring observations and modeling together to advance Arctic research. Other areas that we've talked about under this objective include continuing some of the efforts that the modeling team has done in looking at Arctic reanalysis, which is a topic that by its nature brings modeling and observations together, or looking at ideas for other test beds or frameworks to help support these activities. Our second draft objective is to conduct assessments and gaps analysis to understand observational and modeling needs in support of the priority areas. And so here we have a couple of draft deliverables that we've discussed. One of these builds on work that the Observing Group and the US Arctic Observing Network Board have done, which is a sort of specific methodology looking at a value tree analysis to understand gaps. And so there's sort of two things we're looking at. One is doing some of those analyses on specific topics the priority areas are interested in. And the second is kind of developing those tools in a community of practice around them. More on the modeling side, we've discussed potential deliverables around modeling intercomparisons, which are one way of really identifying some of the gaps in the modeling space. So those could be contributing to and participating in existing model intercomparisons, or starting to identify and develop the need for new MIBs. Our third objective is to increase coordination and engagement between federal activities and international and non-federal partners who are conducting observing and modeling in the Arctic. So some of this that we'll build on in terms of the international space can build on activities that, again, the groups are already doing, such as in the observing space. The observing collaboration team has been strongly involved in the international SEAN activity and the roads process. The modeling group I know is quite involved in international modeling activities as well. And then on the non-federal side, it's trying to work to develop more awareness and engagement with non-federal partners, such as the state of Alaska, the tribes, and local communities. So there are, agencies that are supporting community observations. So working more with bringing some of those together, working more with the foundational activity and participatory research as well, to work with them on developing more specific activities in this area. And then our final draft objective is to support and promote best practices in field observations and modeling. Again, this is an area where there's already a substantial amount of work going on in this among both teams. But so for in the field observations, obviously we're talking about things like safety in the field, both physical and emotional safety in the field, as well as trying to develop more sustainable practices and environmental stewardship in field observations. For both observations and modeling, best practices again include, diversity and inclusion in research activities, and working with the data management team in promoting ideas of the FAIR principles around observational and modeling data. And also an idea we've discussed is sort of better communication of what our observations and modeling data mean. So better communication to stakeholders and other folks outside the research community. So that's just a quick overview of the objectives. So as Hazel said, we are currently in the public input period. So we're interested in your input, both on the objectives themselves and on specific deliverables and actions we might do under the objectives. And so I just have a few questions here, but this is just to prompt the discussion. You're welcome to bring up any other topic you want. But one of the things that I mentioned is that, and that Hazel has mentioned, is one of the big roles that IARPC plays is helping to coordinate groups. And so one of the questions we have is, how can engagement and coordination under IARPC add value to your research activities? Are there groups or researchers or types of other researchers that you would really like to coordinate with, but you don't quite know how, and that IARPC can help you play a role, or perhaps there's examples of that people have that can discuss. Another question is around this sort of engagement between the observing and modeling communities. It's something that we think is important, but do you agree that that more engagement between those communities will benefit your research? And again, are there any specific activities that we should undertake to support that? And then sort of my final discussion question is just, what are the highest priority activities under this general area of MOMP that you think we should focus on? So with that, I will stop sharing here so I can see you all, and go from there. I will also welcome any of my fellow MOMP members or collaboration team leaders. If there's anything I neglected, you can feel free to add that on. I see Hayo has a question, so go ahead, Hayo.
Thanks, Sally. That was great. I might have missed this, sorry, but in your slide of objectives, the second objective was stated as was like identify gaps, relevant to moms. And I just wanted to understand whether you or the moms team is thinking about gaps just in gaps of observations or modeling activities that cover a particular region or variable or sector, or whether you're also thinking about gaps in the range of tools under observations or modeling that are brought to the table. Because the latter is something that I could see as being really important now that you've got these 4 priority areas, which are much more cross-cutting and integrative, where you may just not, or the broader community may just not yet have the tools, or may not be using the tools that you need to fully address the questions in this bigger context.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Hayo. We are interested in tools, in broadly, I would say, in gaps about what observations are needed, what models are needed, what tools are needed to bring those observations and modeling together to answer questions, what capacity is needed to understand and use those tools. So I think it is a broad type of gaps analysis, or broad understanding of gaps that we're looking for that maybe we don't articulate as well as we could. So that's a really good point. And if there's suggestions around particular ways to get at those gaps, that's another thing that I think would be useful. So as I mentioned, the US AON board has done this particular value tree analysis methodology where they go out and interview a lot of subject matter experts and try and sort of trace this path. But there's, I'm sure, also other avenues and probably even reports and documents out there that have identified some of these needs also.
If I can just follow up real quick. One area that strikes me is that well-being features prominently both as a driver, but then it's referenced in at least 2 of your priority areas. And and this is well-being of individuals and communities in the Arctic. So it might be worthwhile to see whether Craig Scheithlook, who's on the call, who I know has thought about this also from his perspective, working with some of these groups, whether that might actually require more thought or more effort, because the sort of the classic approaches may not address what's important to well-being, and at the same time the communities themselves or the people in the region may not have had the support and the opportunity to actually define what it is that they see as critical to well-being.
Yeah, great. Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sally, and thank you, Hayo, for bringing up that point. Yeah, that to me is definitely an area of focus for sure. Part of my Indigenous fellowship here with IARPC is kind of bridging the gap in between community or tribes and the IARPC and the IARPC platform. And then I think the idea and the thought of well-being and then co-production is such a broad and inclusive methodology or thought process to use to engage and get feedback from a tribe or a community in looking at all the way from the foundational activities up to the policy drivers, community health, community resilient and health and well-being. What I'm hoping to do, and thank you for kind of pointing this out, Hayo, is get feedback from folks who have expertise in the idea of co-production, and then feedback hopefully from tribes on what their definitions of community resilience and health and well-being that can kind of contribute to some of these spaces, and then kind of give a community perspective on what a direction or observation or modeling need might be from that perspective. I think that'd be really, really good to have continue to think about the meaning of well-being, community resilience, and health from that perspective, and then kind of build and ground conversations in these different spaces, whether it's internally with our collaboration team meetings or broadly with IARPC around that subject. Because then, yeah, we just get feedback directly from, as opposed to Craig Chythlook, the Indigenous Fellow. So yeah, thank you. I think that's a great start of this conversation. Definitely look forward to having more.
Yes, thank you, Craig. That'll definitely be very valuable. And I think that's certainly one thing, we all have to keep in mind is, as we're developing these deliverables, some of these things we're farther along in than others, and some of them we're still kind of developing. And so the deliverables can be about developing some of these activities and not feel like it needs to be ready to state a really clear endpoint right now. But thank you, Hayo and Craig. Zhijing?
Yeah, so I think I asked a very good question, and I agree with you, Craig. So yeah, Sally answered well in the sense that MOMP it's kind of foundational activity. We look for input, for example, the identify gap analysis, identify gap for kind of long-term point of view. I haven't talked with Sally, but we have been also working with priority area on the shared deliverables. In that sense, when we converge, like for example, when priority area identifies some priority science questions, then we can focus on that and identify observational gap or modeling gap. So I guess we have been interested in both, right? The broad long-term and also short-term in collaboration with the priority areas. For example, community resilient health, Craig mentioned, and like others, Arctic system actions on that. Yeah.
Sorry, trouble unmuting there. Yes, thank you, Zhijing. Yeah, and I think another good point there was about the time frame. So, I mean, we are working on, so it's a 5-year research plan, and we're going to have 2 biennial implementation plans. So again, we can think about deliverables that we can deliver in the next 2 years, and the deliverables that we can start building on and can deliver more long-term things in the next implementation plan. So again, I think sometimes people get a little stuck that it's a 2-year plan and we can only do some short-term things, but I think we can initiate some things that would then become more to fruition in the next plan. Wilbert?
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, I would like to kind of to propose 2 ideas that might be relevant for this, for the MOMP activity. So the first one would be a kind of a working group with the kind of the high latitude leads, basically, of the main modeling centers here in the United States. So of course we're getting towards maybe the preparations for CMAP7, and we know that many global climate models still have very significant biases in many aspects in the Arctic. And I'm just wondering if it would be useful to have a working group and then have the people from the main modeling centers kind of get together and discuss how how progress can be made, maybe by interacting. And I think the meeting that we had last year with the modeling center leads was very useful, a very useful start to get the dialogue going. Kind of similarly, there's also Wei Chang from University of Washington submitted a proposal to the National Oceanographic Partnership Program, kind of proposing to compare ocean models, the Arctic Ocean representation in different climate models, basically, and that would also be a really good start to organize that in the IARPC setting. I think that would be very useful for the modeling centers to join forces and try to improve the representation of the Arctic in climate models. It could be the ocean or the sea ice or maybe the atmosphere or the terrestrial domain. But yeah, I think it would be useful to keep that conversation going. That maybe hopefully we started back in May of last year. So another activity that we've been talking about a lot already with Renew 2 is kind of a follow-up to the FAMOS activity. The Forum for Arctic Model and Observational Synthesis was a project that has had 2 phases now, and before that it was the Arctic Ocean Model into Comparison project. And in the last 2 phases, basically, it was more or less a kind of a grassroots effort. It was a pretty international community that got together to perform and execute, to propose, execute, and some model into comparison projects, basically, and with a focus on the integration of models and data. So with Renew have been discussing a lot about starting another phase of that, and we decided on a new name, kind of a consortium for advancement of marine Arctic system science, and which would be funded hopefully by DOE as well as ONR. There's the focus is going to be on understanding the marine Arctic system by combining models and observations in again by kind of grassroots model into comparison studies. And I think a large part of the outcomes, the deliverables, will be relevant for priority area 2 on the Arctic systems integration part. But I can also imagine that some aspects of this activity could be really geared towards delivering for MOMP. And one idea that I have is that we could think about maybe developing or defining metrics for comparing models or benchmarking models against Arctic observations, and so maybe implementing those metrics in metrics packages that could be used by the broader modeling community, basically. So those are the 2 ideas that I wanted to discuss today.
Great, thank you so much, Wilbert. Yeah, I like the idea of the metrics and the benchmarking. That's a really nice thing to bring the observing and modeling communities together. So thanks for that idea. Richard?
So going to Wilbert's first point, I think when I think of gaps, I unfortunately think of it in the reverse sense, in that I probably don't know a whole lot about modeling or observing systems that interact directly with the local communities. And so I think we need to recognize, that IARPC is composed of many agencies, but only a few of those agencies have a public interface. So there are probably a lot of NOAA activities in particular that we're not as familiar with in terms of, risk assessment and health quality and things like that we don't know about. And so I think in addition to canvassing the modeling centers, we also need to canvass these agencies and get a better understanding of what's being used right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Rich. I think that, the folks that are, I think IARPC is expanding or trying to broaden participation quite a bit and a bit more into some of those communities. But I think sort of the historical participation in IARPC has been more in sort of the areas currently covered under our Arctic systems interaction priority area. And so we tend to have more, less modelers, not modelers, less people who are using models directly with, that kind of stakeholder and local connection. So I think that's a really good point. I guess question I have, it's sort of how do we do it? How do we find those people? But I think that's, we just need to work on it a little bit more. But also thinking maybe about what, again, a deliverable could be that we try and develop more of those connections, not that we kind of have to come out right now and say we know exactly what, that gap is going to be. But I think that's a really good point. Appreciate it. Rainu?
So I like all the suggestions that were brought up, but I particularly also want to touch, and I'm very supportive of the metrics activity and so on. But I particularly want to touch one thing in terms of co-production of knowledge that was brought about. Essentially, if we can have a science question, so it could be from either Arctic system, wherever it is, and you could have a science question and then see what its relevance is to the end users, the people who are really experiencing the change out there. And I don't know how to bring that about. I think there are a few, IARPC is the closest that can bring that connection. If we can have a conversation, maybe a series of conversation, because it takes a while for us all to speak the same language, and then translate that. And also, I'm not taking away from the science of developing metrics, but also translate the end user questions to potential metrics that can be evaluated to see whether the models are improving along those lines that are useful for the end user, for the people in the field. That would be a good way to go about it. And you have the cycle repeating itself. It's easier to do this kind of an interaction. It's slightly easier to do this kind of an interaction in the case of well-known topics like interacting with water managers and understanding the relevance of the models. But I think it should be done also with respect to activities in the Arctic. And, as an example, I hate doing this, but I don't want everyone to be distracted now, but there's a project that we are funding that does the same thing, but not in the Arctic, but with respect to interacting with the water managers. So I just wanted to build all these ideas together also. If that's potentially an achievable goal, that would be a great thing.
I agree, Rainu. That's it's a nice thought to bring together, Wilbert's idea around metrics and the idea of better connecting to local communities and other stakeholders and other, folks actually living in the Arctic and needing this information.
Yeah, I agree on that, the knowledge. I saw the NSR colleagues, Roberto and Olivia here. The NSF, the Navigating New Arctic, actually, they have focused on that, the co-production of knowledge. They found a lot of activities, and maybe may can borrow some kind of good idea from those ongoing projects.
Yeah, I think it's something that we all need to, share and learn from some of the activities that do exist, because there are, as you say, there are some that are starting and others of us don't have much experience with that, but we can learn from the folks who've started working in those areas. Hazel?
Yeah, thanks. This has been a really interesting conversation. I just wanted to take a minute as the conversation sort of heats up, that it's hard to tell how folks are feeling when you have your cameras off. So no pressure to put your cameras on, understand what it's like to join a lot of Zoom meetings. But I guess I wanted to encourage or open the floor for folks that are maybe less familiar with IARPC or might have questions or ideas that they're not, so sure if this is the right space for it. Just to encourage you that any ideas are welcome, and we would like to hear from everyone on the call today. So please feel free to jump in.
Thank you, Hazel. I'll also say if you're not comfortable turning your camera on or speaking, you can also feel free to ask a question or put a comment in the chat. So that's another option. But yes, thank you, Hazel. Olivia.
Yeah, hi. So just speaking really quickly for the priority area 3, we have agencies like the Denali Commission and HUD and Department of Transportation involved. They're very much on near solutions, modeling related to infrastructure optimization. And I don't think we've really built a community for modelers in IARPC focused on those topics. So I know we may not get very far in 2 years, but if it's possible to have an objective that's kind of building community on building capacity for this type of modeling, that would be super helpful for priority area 3.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And so, yeah, trying to figure out what such a deliverable would look like, what is achievable, what we think is achievable in 2 years. But I really like that idea of trying to develop, and it sort of, I think, follows on what Richard was saying, of trying to bring a different set of modeling folks into our community. So broadening our network. Thank you, Olivia. John?
Hey, sorry, I don't have a camera. I'm kind of mobile on my phone right now. But so I'm John Woods. I'm all of Sustainable Research Global. It's fairly new to this team. We do have this thing called icepaper within the DoD, which obviously is a department within IARPC, but it stands for the International Cooperative Engagement Program for Polar Research, and it's a 7-nation consortium: US, Canada, the Nordics, plus New Zealand, so North and South. And we have an environmental working group that I'm trying to engage more within IARPC, and modeling and observations as a sub-working group underneath that. Our number one goal is not to duplicate efforts, but leverage each other's efforts. This is on what Robert was touching on with a model. Interscout Harbor is funding that, but we're trying to do something similar within the defense groups on a model intercomparison. Think more observations or operational observations. So sea ice, atmospherics, etc. And this is going to be open to everyone. So the icepaper MOU is involved in security, and I think we basically agreed that all the IARPC agencies within the U.S. can participate. So I've been working really closely with Liz, and I think what I'm going to try to do is maybe schedule an IARPC. We have an IARPC self-forming team for icepaper, and I would probably schedule a meeting, make sure it's well advertised within this group. Project arrangements. So these are 3 years concrete. Funding is provided, and it would be a project, and we're really in the outline stage right now. So I'd love to talk more with this group on how we can leverage that opportunity for this group and vice versa. So I'll be standing by. I'll put my email in the chat as well in case some folks might not have it. Please feel free to reach out to me if any more questions. Over.
Great, thank you, John. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that activity, so that's really nice to hear about. And Liz has put something in the chat on it, so that's great. But yeah, I'll be happy to follow up with you more to talk about how we can bring that in, or as you say, leverage and not duplicate. I'm not seeing any more hands. Oh, no, that was just, oh, Douglas, yes. Yeah.
Hey everyone, I'm having some problem with bandwidth, like John and some others. First, I'm glad that John talked about icepaper and the link there. We do a fair amount of work with icepaper through the Arctic Domain Awareness Center, but what in the past has been primarily like Department of Defense and defense oriented, but I'm really glad to hear that there's the opportunity to find ways to intersect with the Arctic work that's being done through them, and what we are proposing with the Arctic research plan. So I think that's good news. And John, you will be able to provide more information on this?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said,
oh yeah, good.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, we have like it's a lot of formal just project arrangement detail, but the parameters we want to go after, the players, and those are all up for discussion. So over.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts or questions? Any other feedback from trying to look for my other MOMP team members, Sujing or Roberto? Not to put you on the spot.
I think it's a great discussion, and yeah, lots of think about and some new information like John provided and Wilbert also provided a lot of good thoughts. So I cannot think anything else I can add. Just yeah, please chime in.
I might oh, Sandy has her hand raised. After Sandy has her speaks, I might put Colleen on the spot because I know that the NG team put forward a few ideas for us. So if there's time after Sandy and Yvette, I might ask you to share a couple of those. Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is just kind of a general comment or question for the group, really. And many of the names here and faces here are people who are really spun up on the IARPC Collaborations context. And I think I have kind of two questions. One is, how do we sort of, this is all really complicated, right? There's a lot of different themes, there's a lot of different teams, there's going to be a lengthy list of deliverables, there's timelines and acronyms and stuff, and where do you guys see the opportunities to sort of simplify the message about what we're trying to accomplish here, and what kinds of like communications tools or mechanisms could we put in place to make it easier for people to sort of track what we're trying to do here and engage with what we're trying to do here? One thing that Sally and Will and I talk about a lot is we have a really changing group of people who follow these discussions, and it's hard to sort of sustain and build real efforts over time. I heard Wilbert bring up this piece about like maybe developing some task groups who kind of pay attention to certain themes. But you guys are the champions of like showing up and answering these questions, and how can we, like, what are the opportunities to just make this simpler, more effective, more engaging, more focused?
I think those are good questions, Sandy. I don't know if anyone has a response to Sandy. Maybe some questions for us to chew on. Maybe some thoughts will come to you all. You can put them in the chat to share with us. Yeah, I do think it's a good question. And I think whether this idea of working groups or sub teams, kind of task groups, getting smaller groups together to really focus on something, and then maybe kind of come back to the collaboration team and let us know how it's going. Of course, that's also just like one more group for people to feel like they have to belong to. So I can sort of see pros and cons with it. I think it's a good question. Yvette? You're on mute.
My question was about the line also, because I'm following different groups, and by the nature of my works that is really a couple, ocean, ice, biogeochemical, need of data, need of, so I'm following all those groups. And then I was on the other day trying to figure out, things that I've been missing, and even the website now is becoming a little complicated to find things. So always in the modeling observation for me, when there is some strong interaction, there are two ways also, is the way of modeling providing information for observation, and observation providing information for modeling. And very often now, I find myself spending a lot of time also trying to find the information about the data in the formats that the data are not always available for directly use with a model. So it's always, if I change a region in the Arctic, it's really restarting the whole process. Is there anything in the collaboration of the two teams that would focus also on the distribution of data and the distribution of model output to make it easier for the two communities to interact? So my question is twofold: information finding, because the group are getting, kind of, also I see the same face, but I see also different faces, and how the information between modeler and observationalist are distributed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's one reason that can be difficult or one barrier for modelers and observationalists to work together. So trying to work to reduce that. That's a good suggestion. Thank you. Allison?
Hi, everybody. This has been a really great discussion. I just wanted to mention a couple of activities which I think are contributing in a positive way towards these foundational efforts. One is through the Sustaining Arctic Observing Network's Polar Observing Working Group. We're a small group of folks. Sometimes there's only 4 or 5 that get together, sometimes there's 20, but we've been working on a specification for cataloging observing networks and observing assets, and we're hoping to have that available for publication and adoption more widely across agencies in the US and internationally. And then also through the work that I'm involved in with the Arctic Research Mapping Application and Arctic Observing Viewer, we're going to be working with the Arctic Data Center. We're meeting here in a couple of weeks to talk about updates for data management plans for actually cataloging geotagged information about where people are actually conducting their work. So those observation sites, transects, and areas, and tagging them up with appropriate observed variables. And so I think those are concrete steps that are being taken that will contribute to these foundational activities. And I think you'll hear more about this later this year as we have something to present, but I hope that's a step in the right direction of what Sandy's going for in terms of simplifying, because I know that she's put a lot of effort into the value tree analysis, and without the inventory efforts, we don't really have anything to build those on. So I just wanted to put a plug in for that effort.
Yeah, those
Thank
both
you.
sound, thank you. Those both sound really interesting and relevant. I agree. And I think one of our objectives around the sort of best practices is, one of the things we've talked about there is a little bit some of the data management and some of this, and we need to coordinate a little bit more with the data management foundational activity as well, because it's obviously something that it's very important for both. You don't have data without the observations and the models, so we need to bring those pieces together. But yeah, it's good to hear about those two efforts. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
So we just have a couple of minutes left here. Renu, go ahead.
I just want to address the point of the fact that the same groups may not meet, and maybe forming a working group might be challenging. In the sense that we are adding an additional meeting, but I've also seen that that concept has worked well in other interagency groups. If we have one task and if we have a group focused on that one task, they can go and come back without too much of an issue. And maybe that group could even just coordinate a workshop once a year or once in 2 years as a result of trying to focus on one particular activity. So just wanted to throw that thought out there. I didn't want to, I think there is value in the groups meeting with a common focus.
Yeah, thanks. And I think I will just ask Colleen maybe to share a couple of the ideas that the NG team had put together, because I think they will be, you don't have to share them all, but maybe if there's just one or two you want to mention.
Sure, and I put them in the chat as well. Just a couple of ideas of sort of model-driven data synthesis, especially to try to get to the Pan-Arctic. So our colleagues at places like the USGS Powell Center and the above team are already doing some of these things. So we're contributing NG Arctic data to those, but also thinking about how we can synthesize data about things like disturbance across the Arctic and get the correct framework into models as we think more about those aspects. And then sort of more broadly thinking about emotional and physical safety in the field. We've had some success with tabletop exercises within our project talking about those things, and I think that would be fun and interesting to bring to the broader community. And then we're also interested in hosting this sort of bring empiricists to the model workshop. I've been calling it boots on the desktop, and I got in trouble for saying it that way. But folks like me who are boots on the ground making measurements, I would like to learn more about how to program within sort of the Earth system model framework, or at least think about the connections so that I can make better measurements to inform what the model's doing. So those are a few of the ideas.
Yeah, we almost need maybe a partner. I'm trying to think of the buddy system. Every observer needs a model buddy and vice versa, right? So you can even learn what speak the same language. But anyway, thank you, Colleen. Appreciate that. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We are at the end of our hour. Hazel, did you have any, and it's been a really great discussion. I really want to thank everyone for contributing. It's been really nice. I really appreciate all the input. We'll encourage you, as Hazel mentioned, also there's the official form that you can submit your input, but I have been taking notes, and I know Hazel has as well. Is there anything else you wanted to close us out with, Hazel?
No, I think that's great. We'll hope to see you at future meetings, and please do grab that link to the Google form. If you have any other ideas in the next 2 weeks or so, you can put them in there, and they will be well used and well considered, and we really appreciate you taking the time today. So thank you so much. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.